Well, look, those Singtel executives would have been well shocked as the drama surrounding 9.8 million Optus customers' data being hacked deepened today. Now, this started with the hacker following through on a promise to release the information of 10,000 customers a day for 4 days unless Optus paid a ransom of $1 million US. Well, the information released via the database was for 10,200 Optus customers. We obtained that database and will not show it to you, for that would mean we would reveal the customers' identities. But what we can tell you is it includes 52 Medicare numbers. And the Federal Minister, Claire O'Neill, again criticised the company for not telling her about that. It also revealed 256 passport numbers, and 11 of the email addresses were for members of the Department of Defence. But now, after the database was dropped, it was deleted by the hacker who issued a statement. Now, that statement says, "Too many eyes, we will not sell the data to anyone. We can't, even if we want to. Personally deleted data from the drive, only copy. Sorry to 10,200 Australians whose data was leaked. Australia will see no gain in fraud. This can be monitored. Maybe for 10,200 Australians, but rest of population, no. Very sorry to you. Deepest apology to Optus for this. Hope all goes well from this. Optus, if you're reading, we would have reported exploit if you had method to contact. No security mail, no bug bounties, no way to message." In other words, you can see the spelling mistakes. Finally, ransom not paid, but we don't care anymore, was mistake to scrape published data in first place. So that was the statement from the hacker, apparently. Business Now contacted Optus and asked 2 questions. The first, did Optus pay a ransom? The answer was no. The second question, do you think this matter is over? The answer is this matter is still under investigation by the Australian Federal Police. So let's bring in here one of Australia's foremost cybersecurity experts, Alastair MacGibbon, Chief Strategy Officer with CyberCX and formerly the head of the government's Australian Cybersecurity Centre. Alastair, always good to talk to you about these matters. Given the fact that the hacker took down this database, what would motivate that person to do so?
Well, Ross, I think there's an awful lot of water still to go under this bridge. We don't know if someone has paid the ransom. We don't know if someone has bought the data from the criminal and therefore they've taken it down. We don't know if the criminal is actually doing what they claimed online. Remember, they're criminals, so you're never going to get a straight answer from them.
But one thing that is known is that the data of 9.8 million Australians is out there somewhere. Now, what happens to that data in the future, that's still a big question mark, regardless of what the hacker claims is happening today.
Yeah, you can't put that data genie back in the bottle, it's out. So we do know that an awful lot of information, and Optus, to your point in the introduction, probably didn't necessarily tell the full story over the last several days when they were just talking about driver's licences and passports. As you said, there's Medicare numbers. There are obviously really interesting email addresses and the like.
Including from the Prime Minister's department as one of those that we spotted ourselves.
Right. So once that data's out, it's out, right? The point is there has been a breach. The Minister has said to the public that she doesn't believe it to be sophisticated. Optus claims it was. Everything I've seen to date now indicates this was not a sophisticated crime. It was a crime, definitely. No one deserves to be victimised, including Optus, but it would appear to be a pretty minor technical problem that has led to a very serious loss of data that can never be returned to those individuals now.
OK, so given the fact that you ran this department for government, just explain the implications for Optus as a business or any business that has such a significant amount of data stolen from it.
Well, this is a wake-up call, and I know that's a phrase that gets thrown around a lot in circumstances like this, but it is, right? We've had something like 9.8 million or more people's data lost. Wake-up call for anyone that collects information, government included, about why that information was collected, probably for quite legitimate purposes. Know your customer regime that is imposed by the government for those of us who get telecommunication services. How you then use that data for other purposes, how you store the data, when you destroy the data, and what the penalties are for any loss of that data.
So the penalties are the important part of this, because clearly, as you say, if this is not sophisticated, as Optus has claimed previously, but it is a fairly straightforward exploitation of their systems. Then the question is whether the company should be penalised, whether it's a lesson to be learned, because obviously you cannot have such a significant breach without having some consequence.
Yes, if there was significant neglect, and that will only come about with the government's investigation, then clearly the penalty should be higher. If it was actually a sophisticated hacker in some future example, and a normal cybersecurity expert looks at this, it's a bit like the reasonable person test in court, right? If a reasonable person would say it was well protected but a more sophisticated person stole it, you'd imagine those penalties would be lower in some future regime. I think the minister's referring to things like GDPR, which is the European Data Protection Standards, and that, as I say, talks about how you collect information, how you store it, how you can use it for other purposes. That's important because what we don't know is whether this data sitting in the database that has been basically strip mined by the offender, we don't know if it was being used for the right purposes there. Should it have even been on a database, or should it have been locked away just in case government needed access to that information? We don't know.
Okay, so then the final part about this, the motivation of the hacker is pretty obvious. This was ransomware, this was exploitation, this was for gain. But that hacker has also taken flight because the authorities clearly would be on their tail trying to identify that person.
Yeah, look, the former police officer in me says I'd love to think this was because there was an Australian Federal Police investigation and that the Australian Cybersecurity Centre was chasing this person. I'm a little bit sceptical as to whether or not that's why the offender has taken down this data. Only time will tell whether it was because they were frightened of the Australian government that they've changed their actions. If that is the case, maybe that'll convince other criminals not to do a similar act.
And as you point out, the other option is that somebody's paid the ransom.
Maybe. Or someone has bought the data.
That's right. But Optus says it's not it that has paid the ransom, if there is that's taken place. At this stage, we don't know. So that's interesting. Alastair MacGibbon, always good to have in the program and great to get your insights today.
Thanks, Ross.